Why study gender, culture, and communications? Well, there's a few reasons. One, media regularly offers advice and commentary on the subject of sex and gender, and it's been in the news quite a bit in the last few years. Secondly, students' demand for courses in gender and communication is pretty high. Thirdly, learning to better understand relationships between gender, culture, and communication can be empowering for us all. Research into gender, communication, and culture has been happening much more as of late. Since the 1980s, gender, communication, and culture has been a growing area of interdisciplinary research. And it was only in 2006 that the first handbook of gender and communication was published. Research on gender takes place in many different academic fields. Researchers use a variety of methods and perspectives to study gender. Reasons to learn about communication, gender, and culture? Well, studying these topics serve important goals. For one, learning about gender helps you understand how culture influences understandings of who we are and who others are. This includes a study in sociology. Two, studying gender and culture and communication patterns will help you gain insight about your own beliefs and communication patterns so that you may make informed choices about with whom you'd like to be and who would you like to be interacting with in society. Thirdly, your effectiveness as a communicator will be increased as you learn to understand and adapt to diverse variety of communication styles. So let's get started by first introducing the topic, sex, gender, culture, and communication. So we're going to begin with looking at research on gender, communication, and culture. To begin with, there's several types of research, and we're going to begin with quantitative research. This is the gathering of data that can be quantified, therefore it means counting, and analyze the data to draw a conclusion. Now this is an important type of research because for the most part you have numbers that are not biased, so you gather the number, you count, you see things, you can record that, and you're analyzing the data based on what you've observed and counted. So there are more common quantitative methods. They can be descriptive statistics where they look at and describe populations, surveys, written or oral, looking at thoughts and attitudes, experiments, studies of the relationships between variables in control and experimental groups to observe the outcome. Now the alternative is qualitative or interpretive methods, and the aim is to understand the nature or the meaning of experiences that cannot be quantified. Quantified meaning counted. There's two main methods. Contextual analysis, this is studying communication in textbooks, magazines, that sort of thing. And there's the ethnography, which is an extensive observation of diverse people and cultures and discovering patterns. There is also critical research. Now critical research methods, this is identifying and contest inequities and problems in social life and offer insights into ways unwelcoming environments can be created within organizations. And then there's mixed research. And this is the combination of two or more methods previously described, and it's also useful to combine to get multiple types of information. Learning about communication, gender, and culture, well, it enhances and appreciates of cultural complexity. It enhances enhances insights into our own gender, and it strengthens the effectiveness as a communicator. So let's carry on with gender studies. And we can start with, and as many people have probably understood and find out for themselves, is that gender can be confusing. Gender is in a transitional era. Cultural views of gender are in flux. The culture, today, we may be confused or conflicted regarding our stance on issues about which people of prior generations had more clear-cut views. Confusing, we probably didn't prescribe to our grandparents' perspective of ideals. On one level, we think women and men are equal, and yet on another level, we may hold traditional values and beliefs. This is why we live in a transitional era. Consider the genetic differences between a man and a banana. There's about 50% similarity in genetic material. Now, how about a man and a chimp? Well, there's less than 2%. So how much difference can there be between man and a woman? Well, about 1%. So how much of the differences are constructed by society, language, and culture? It's difficult to find language to discuss patterns of gendered communication. Women and men are troublesome terms, implies that all can be grouped together. Pop psychology suggests that men and women are inherently and distinctly different. Is this your experience? The difference between men and women are not solely biological and natural. They may also be related to cultural experiences, hereditary, economic class, race, and sexual identity. Essentializing, well, this occurs when we assume that all members of a group, men or all women, are the same. It ignores individual variations and differences among members of the same sex. While this text discusses generalization about women and men, it's important to remember that there are not essential qualities. It's important that there are not essential qualities possessed by all members of a sex. The difference between sex and gender and the definition of gender and culture are important to understand gender, culture, and communication. So let's carry on this discussion a bit, where sex and gender, sexual orientation, culture, communication are interlinked. They cannot study one without understanding the others. Sex and gender are related concepts, but they're not the same. They're inconsistent they are inconsistent for transgendered individuals. So for example, sex, this is the designation based on biology. Sex is based on external genitalia, internal sex organs. They're determined by chromosomes. Most people who have two sex chromosomes which produce an XX for female or for male XY. However, chromosomes can vary. There's XO, XXX, XXY, XYY, which suggests that biologically they are actually more than two sexes. Some born with characteristics of each sex, traditionally called hermaphrodites. Today they're named, or they're referred to as intersexed, is what's preferred. Hormones also influence sexual development of male and female sex organs and how our bodies develop throughout life. Hormones influence development. Fetuses with Y-bathed androgens develop male sex organs. Fetuses with without Y, fewer androgens, and develop female sex organs. Female fetuses may be exposed to excessive progesterone that may help develop female genitalia. Male fetuses may be deprived of progesterone, which male genitalia may not develop. And so it gets much more confusing when we look at not just the biology, but the hormones. Biology influences how we develop, but it doesn't determine behavior or personality. When we consider gender, it's socially constructed and socially expressed. So being classified male or female is determined by biological characteristics. Gender is socially meaningful. It's socially a social meaning assigned to sex. It's socially constructed and socially expressed, whereas gender identity, now this is a person's perception of one's own sex. Neither innate nor necessarily stable. Gender identity is more fluid. It's defined by society, it varies across cultures, it even varies over time. Born male or female can be, that's the sex part, learning to act masculine or femininely, well, that's gender. We learn to express our gender through interactions with others and with the media. Gender differs from culture to culture. Currently in North America, masculinity is associated with strength, ambition, rationality, emotional control. Femininity is associated with physical attractiveness, differential and nurturing behavior, emotional expression, and concern with people and relationships. Now, we will also know people who those don't fit with, and that just reinforces the fluidity of gender. We uphold or remake meaning of masculinity and femininity. In the 1970s, an androgen was coined for man and woman. An androgynous individual embodied qualities considered both masculine and feminine. Gender is learned. We have role models, our friends, and culture influence how we understand gender. Gender grows out of cultural ideas that stipulate that social meaning and expectation for each sex. Conventional views of both sex and gender are challenged by people who define themselves as transgender, trans, or genderqueer. The meaning of gender can vary across cultures. Now, I'll be posting videos from time to time in the weeks about gender, and I'm going to post a video in week 2 in your folder looking at multiple genders in different cultures. So let's look at beyond sex and gender, and we'll look at some of the variables that perhaps you've learned about or have seen in the media. We'll look at sexual orientation, which refers to a person's preference for a romantic or sexual partner. Heterosexual, romantic, and sexual partners are of different sex from their own. Gay, romantic, and sexual partners that are men. Lesbian, romantic and sexual partners are women. Bisexual, romantic and sexual partners with both sexes. Now, there are other prefixes that are used in gender. A cis, the prefix CIS, is a person who fits conventional categories, whatever is considered normal. Whereas trans as a prefix is used across, is the cross from gender identity assigned at birth. So when we consider transgender, it refers to individuals who feel that their biologically assigned sex doesn't match their true sexual identity. If a transgendered person takes hormones or has surgery to reassign their sex, the term transsexual has been used. Post-transition males to females usually refer to themselves as MTFs, male to female, or FTM for female to male. Most transition transgendered people have the same sexual preferences before and after their surgery. That is to say, if you were attracted to men before, they continue to be attracted to men after surgery. The examples in the images on your screen are of people who have made their transition. The women were men and the men were women. Sexual orientation does not necessarily change when a person transitions from one sex to another. Same sex in marriages or committed relationships after, some stay in their marriages and committed relations after transitioning. Transitioned men or females often gain keen insight into gender dynamics in a cultural life because they have experience being in both sexual roles in a society. They often become very aware of what it is to be a woman when they're used to being a man, or vice versa. Transgendered and intersex people challenge dualities. It's not all about just men and women. There is often this ground in between. They also disrupt society's assumption that sex and gender and sexual orientation correlate in consistent and natural ways. The link between sex, gender, and sexual orientation are not as clear-cut as we often believe. Culture, with its practices and structures, structures would be institutions, practices that reflect and uphold the social order, upheld by defining certain groups, values, expectations, and meanings, and patterns of behavior as good and others as bad or wrong. Societal view of gender are communicated through interpersonal interactions, media, cultural traditions, gender roles, and patterns of interacting with families and ideology, even practices out of institutions, for example, women who give up their name after marriage. Patriarchy, or patriarchal societies, in which means that the dominant ideology of institutions and the practices were created by men and imply value to masculine perspectives and priorities. This results in a pervasive and naturalized view of an appropriate roles for and behaviors for men and women, which we tend to take for granted. Seldom pause to reflect and take is what we mean by take for granted, and we don't question. So learning to question is really important. These cultural prescriptions for gender empowers you to choose your own course of action and identity. So keeping up with the communication is a dynamic process. Well, let's look at that. Communication is dynamic without clear beginnings and clear endings. The dynamic nature of communication emphasizes its ongoing nature. Communication may influence how we think or how we feel and influence future interactions. Therefore, communication events do not have precise starting and end points. It's a process. Systems influence how we interact and what meanings we attach to messages. More than context affects meaning, all aspects of communication are interlinked, influenced by how we feel, the time of the day, the place, and things like that. They may influence our interpretation. Largest system affecting communication is culture. Society's views and treatments of men and women change over time. Systems interact, each part affects all others. So there's two sort of levels of meaning of communication, if you will. There's a context level of meaning. This is the literal meaning. The content level is the literal meaning of a message, which also implies an appropriate response. The relationship level of meaning, it defines the relationship between communicators by indicating each person's identity and the communicator's relationship to each other. The relationship level of meaning is particularly important in reflecting and affecting how people feel about each other. It tells how to interpret the content level of meaning. Relationships levels of meaning are important when trying to understand gendered patterns of communication. Interpretation is a term that's used. The content level of meaning of an interpretation is what is said. The more important level of meaning is usually the relationship level, which deals with the conversational partner's right to interrupt, dismiss his or her topic, or initiate his or her own. We're getting into looking at meaning and how they're created in the process of human interaction with symbols. So when we look at that sort of notion about using symbols, well, we're symbol-using creatures is what humans are. Symbols are abstract, ambiguous, arbitrary, and ways of representing phenomenon. We do not have inherent qualities. Meaning does not exist in words or symbols themselves. We give symbols meaning. Their symbolic communication requires reflection and thought for interpretation. Individuals construct an interpretation of communication influenced by many factors. They draw on past experience. We draw on knowledge of people with whom we're interacting, and other factors in a communication system. Differences in interpretation are sources of misunderstanding and can become more effective. We need to ask for clarification. We need to see how people are interpreting us, get feedback, if you will. And that all helps us with creating meaning through our interaction with symbols. We need to be asking questions and getting feedback. I hope this has helped get some grasp behind the basics in Chapter 1. Now remember, you must use your textbook. It's important for this class. And dedicate some time to making notes, doctoring up your text, and being ready to understand the concepts of gender, culture, and communication. Good luck, everybody. I hope this was helpful. Bye now.